Ida has struck Louisiana and is causing damage not seen since the days of Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. Meanwhile, the Northwest continues to be ablaze. That's thanks to the wildfires that are sweeping that area. So joining us now to talk about the extreme weather that we're seeing is Jon Porter, Chief Meteorologist over at AccuWeather. John, great to have you here as always. So let's first get our viewers the latest on what's happening with Hurricane Ida here first.
Well, good morning, Baker. Good to be with you on Wake Up with Cheddar this morning. This was a very catastrophic storm, unfortunately, across Louisiana with a very significant impact to people and property. Almost a worst case scenario in terms of a landfalling hurricane with winds in excess of 150 miles per hour, a Category 4 hurricane making landfall in Louisiana yesterday, bringing with it the dangerous storm surge, the heavy rainfall, and those catastrophic, prolonged, destructive winds over hours and hours. I'm afraid we're just starting to get an understanding of what kind of damage occurred across parts of southern Louisiana here yesterday and overnight. We know there's been, once again, infrastructure damage in many places. The city of New Orleans, many people without power right now after large transmission lines came down and failed. There are 911 outages in many areas, reports of people trapped in attics in some parts of southeastern Louisiana. Very serious threat. And Baker, let's not let our guard down today. Although the storm is now a tropical storm, it's going to be transitioning to a big rain threat here over the coming days over a multi-state area. That's going to be just as dangerous in some places, especially in some spots that have already had very heavy rainfall from tropical rainstorm Fred and Henri in the Northeast. So this is not the time to let your guard down from this storm.
Yeah, you were mentioning the winds, John. I mean, the winds at 150 miles an hour, if it clocked at about 7 miles an hour or more, at 157 miles per hour, it would have been a Category 5 storm instead of a Category 4, which is just crazy how close it was to being that much larger. How did it develop so quickly? I feel like this hurricane just came out of the middle of nowhere, John. How did it develop so fast?
Well, Baker, that's a great point. Here at AccuWeather, we had been warning of this potential storm for more than a week because we were very concerned that it would likely pass over very warm water, the warmest water in all of the Gulf of Mexico after the storm came off the coast of Cuba. And that resulted in it rapidly intensifying, gaining significant wind energy. And that's what happened as we headed through Saturday night and into early Sunday morning. And that poised it to make its very dangerous landfall in Louisiana. We've seen that happen now several times with recent storms. Nora last year, for example, and other storms. So that's where that rapid intensification can happen. The storm became not only stronger, but its wind field expanded. And that creates a more substantial risk from storm surge and those devastating winds. And Baker, I just want to point out about those devastating winds. You know, we're used to seeing the kind of damage that happens from a tornado. Those are usually very localized, maybe sometimes only a part of a neighborhood. Here we're going to be talking about a large part of southern Louisiana that experienced that kind of damage. Fortunately, outside of the main population centers, but that's no consolation at all to the very many people who were in those areas that were affected. Also affected majorly Port Fourchon, which is a huge key port from a crude oil perspective, which is going to have far-ranging economic impacts.
And we also, by the way, Ida is happening right now, but we can't forget about Hurricane Nora. I think it's about now a tropical storm now. You could correct me if I'm wrong there, but it was on the western side of Mexico. What's happening with Nora? Are we expecting that one to get anywhere closer to the United States here?
Yeah, it's interesting. Nora is actually going to be creating a rain threat here as we head through later this week. That moisture is going to be drawn northward into the southwestern United States. And in some places, that's going to be beneficial rainfall. We're dealing with, as you know, a widespread drought, as we've talked about, Baker, you and I before, across the Southwest many times. So we're dealing with that multi-year drought. In some places, that's going to be beneficial. In other places, it's going to be too much rain too quick. We're talking about places like Arizona and New Mexico, up even into parts of Utah and Colorado here later this week. So it's a double-edged sword in terms of Nora's rainfall.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And so let's talk about the wildfires there because, you know, maybe potentially they might get some relief from any of this. What's happening with those wildfires in the Pacific Northwest here?
Well, unfortunately, Baker, it looks like all of the moisture from Nora is going to be to the east of the areas that are dealing with some of the most substantial wildfires right now. That's across parts of Washington, across Oregon, also into Montana and California as well. So this is all too far east to benefit from any of this rain. That situation, especially when there is bursts of local gusty winds, have been a real problem here in the last couple of weeks. And remember, in California, we're sort of ramping into the time period of the year, especially in Southern California, where things are most at risk here as we head into the fall. So no significant rain in sight there in California, and that's going to continue the risk for wildfires in the next several months, especially when we potentially deal with some of those gusty offshore winds here later in the fall. So
let's talk about that, John, because I'm glad you mentioned that, because August typically is usually wildfire season. The fact that wildfire season started even earlier this year, how concerned are meteorologists and geologists and everybody, and firefighters in particular as well, with wildfire season continuing on for a few more months here?
In short, we're very concerned. As you mentioned, we did get an early start across parts of the West. Of course, earlier in the season, it's more of a risk from a wildfire perspective in Arizona and New Mexico, and that risk generally moves off to the north and west through the summer and into the fall. So we're just heading into the peak of the season across California, where everything is extremely dry, and that's why we're concerned if we do get a couple of those pushes of offshore winds later in September and also into October, that can really accelerate fires. And that's why we have such a concern about what's ahead in the months to come. So people are going to want to stay tuned on the fire weather risk for sure in those areas, just as well as staying tuned with the AccuWeather app with our new interactive map tracker to keep track of Ida's progress here over the coming days. Baker, I'm afraid this is going to continue to be a big story from a rainfall perspective and from a isolated tornado risk all the way up and across parts of the middle Atlantic over the next several days. So don't let your guard down on this one.
Absolutely. Jonathan Porter, Chief Meteorologist at AccuWeather. Always good to have you here, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, when we come back, another look what's driving the markets to kick off this week. Plus.